Control room. No, are you there, Nicholas?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Thanks for calling.
I'm really glad to call. It's very nice to be talking to you. It's an honor, actually, because you have been very important in my life.
Oh, thank you so
and
much.
I'm very glad that you have Skype now, because Brazil is kind of far for me to call. Yeah. Anyway, I'm a biologist, and I really enjoy having discussions about science. And there is something that has been coming up a lot about discussing with theists and pseudoscientists. Eventually, we can corner them by countering all their arguments, and they get to, well, you just gotta have faith and all that. It always gets to that, every time. But, and that's where it gets tricky, because we need to explain to them why reason is so superior. Why is reason in the scientific method so superior to faith? And it's kind of hard, because it does seem circular, you know, to explain reason with reason. So how can we get over that and tell them, convince them that reason is actually the best way to go?
So I don't know if you want to address this, but I mean, my take on this is really simple. They already use reason all the time for everything else other than this particular one where they want to set aside reason. So they already see the value of reason and evidence largely. So it seems to me that the point is to expose the problem with faith. And to me, probably the best way to do that is to ask them, is there any position anyone could propose that somebody could not merely accept based on faith? And so clearly, if there's 1,000 propositions, and if we knew that 999 of them were wrong, if we were able to assess that, but all 1,000 of them could be accepted on faith, and which would mean that faith is in no way a good way to determine that you're believing something that's true or likely true.
Yeah, definitely. But it doesn't seem hard to convince them in that particular point, you know. I mean, a couple of days ago, I was talking to a cousin of mine who she's studying to be a doctor, and she told me, you know, I'm not like you. I don't believe science has all this supremacy. I don't believe science is this great thing, this thing that has all the answers. And I'm like, I don't even know how to respond to that. I mean, it's so obvious that science is the best way to...
Well, science,
I don't know.
Science, first of all, doesn't claim to have all the answers. We're
Sure.
still looking for things. The point is that what we're talking about is what's the best way to be fairly confident that we're finding out accurate information. Science doesn't make proclamations about truth. It doesn't say X is true. It builds models of the world that best describe the available evidence and that is best supported by evidence and reasoned argument. And so what we're doing is we're looking around at the world and we're saying, wow, we really would like to explain this. What's the best way to come up with an explanation? And the various methods within science have continuously demonstrated that they're the most reliable pathway to understanding. Whereas faith has never demonstrated this at all. In fact, it's demonstrated the opposite.
Well, and it's kind of scary to me that she's a doctor and doesn't believe that science is a good way
that scared me a lot
find out
too.
stuff. And what methods does she use in treating patients if it's not based on science? Is it?
Yeah, does she not recognize the distinction between the medicine that she practices and throwing bones and the things that the witch doctors used to do to heal people, or still do in some cases? Surely she recognizes the difference in those.
She's a theist. I think that's what she meant. She was talking about the scientific method, and it's very tough to explain why, because for some people it's so obvious that, you know, there's magic and there's something guiding everything and all that, and it's such a different worldview. I can't get around to it and have a discussion with people when it gets to that point.
Yeah, now what you're talking about is more along the lines of these people have had some personal experience, and they have reached the conclusion that the best explanation for that experience is something supernatural, a god or whatever, because that's what religions have offered as the explanation. So they accept these explanations, and then every time they hear another example of this, to them it becomes all this testimonial evidence starts to accumulate. Here's another person who believes what I believe. Here's another person who believes what I believe. And that strengthens it. And you've got to get back to the core and get them to think about and recognize, okay, did I have a good reason for reaching that conclusion in the first place? Because an accumulation of anecdotes doesn't mean that you now have a stronger case for what you believe. And that's what they're doing. And it's like, you know, if somebody walked in right now and said it was raining, if I couldn't see out the window, I'd probably believe them right off the bat, because that's what we do. We tend to believe and trust people, and we want to be trusted. And when you tell somebody, I don't accept, you know, what you believe that the best explanation for the universe is that a God did it, and you tell them you don't accept that, to them, even though you're not calling them a liar, that's what they might take away from it. They feel, you know, personally offended. I've told you something, and you're not believing me. And they're going to take this as an affront. And every time somebody says they do believe them and they accept them, this gets piled on as extra confirmation, and it boosts their confidence level. But your confidence level in an idea has nothing to do with how true it actually is. That's just an expression of how convinced you are. And so you've got to kind of explain this to them so that they can say, okay, let's say for a second, just for a second, that I was mistaken about this, that I didn't have a good reason when I initially started believing these things. How would I go about finding good evidence to confirm what I believe? And if all they can make an appeal to is faith, then you'll have to contrast that with how we would normally go about finding evidence. You're right, it's not an easy task for a lot of people. You've got to drill down to basics, and you might have to talk about something that has nothing to do with religion on its face, but instead has to talk about the process that we go through to determine whether or not something is reasonable to believe.
Yes, precisely. I knew you'd have a nice insight on this subject. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicholas. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks, John, too.
Thanks, Nicholas.
Yeah. Well, so while we're queuing up Mohammed from Dubai, I don't know if you had anything to add to that as well.
No, just what I was saying about she's a doctor. She should understand the scientific method more than most people, I would think. So that goes back to what you were saying about they already use reason and science in most of their life. But then they say, well, but science isn't always the best way to determine stuff. But I bet she prescribes medicines based on things that were tested with the scientific method and treatments and antibiotics and whatever. It's just, for some reason, there's this appeal, this compartmentalization that says, yeah, I'm going to use it for my profession and most of my life, but when it comes to this other thing, I'm going to just disclaim science as being the right approach, and I don't understand that. It's special pleading.
Yeah, it's kind of I think one of the things is, okay, when you're figuring out what dosage to give a client, are you going to rely on the scientific information, or are you just going to say, you know what, God knows everything, let me just ask God what dosage I should give this client. And by the way, if you believe in God, and you believe that God knows these things and that he communicates with you and gives you information, if you're a doctor, why wouldn't you do it that way? The fact that doctors, who also happen to believe in God, are following the science when it comes to dosage and things like this and prescriptions, rather than just appealing to God, I think demonstrates kind of a failure of faith. One that I'm very happy with, by the way. I wouldn't want my doctor to do that.